planning for a show that may not happen. We got a lot of requests from clients on the corporate marketing side, but also even the association side, to communicate kind of the trends we're seeing in this. What we're really looking to do is share what we're hearing and give you tips on how you can go about making decisions for a show that might not happen. So again, just quick housekeeping. This is about a 20 to 25 minute presentation. We'll have some Q&A at the end. Moderator is on standby for support and or reminding you if your mute button is still on. So our moderator for this session is Charlie. Hi, Charlie, and thanks again. We're going to ask questions via the chat icon in the upper right part of your screen. The session will remain open for about 5 minutes after I jump to another session, maybe address any questions via the chat window. You're going to leave the session by closing the browser you're in, and then head back into that event schedule page and go to your next vMeet session. So again, my name is Rick. I'm a Vice President of Sales and Client Strategy, heading up our virtual experiences offering through the course of this pandemic. We're going to kind of head into the topic itself. I want to talk about questions we're getting from whether it's our clients or even our own salespeople. We're going to talk about the lovely legal term force majeure, what that means for you as an event trade show manager or marketing director or CMO. We're going to talk about a consideration that a few of our clients have actually moved forward with, including one that is currently in plans for a new build. And that is thinking through capital expense amortization, maybe how it works with your procurement departments, and going about building a new modular exhibit or event build throughout this time. And then some essential takeaways, and we will get into Q&A. So again, thinking through how this relates to the infinity loop, we're kind of balancing virtual on the left, live on the right. When we're talking about planning for a show that might cancel, we're kind of right in the middle where we're not quite at live events returning, but we're thinking about what we could be doing virtually to maybe bridge the gap or hybrid strategy it. So we're going to share kind of what we're hearing. How do you go about maybe parallel pathing or simultaneously planning and developing a virtual experience, knowing that at some point, Q3, Q4, Q1 21, it may come back. First things first, I hit on this on my last session. The creative process for going about developing, winning experiences for our clients doesn't change because it isn't necessarily face-to-face. So when we're thinking about a show that might not happen and you're developing something that's very different, maybe entirely virtual or maybe kind of a hybrid strategy like a hub and spoke event, our process, which is kind of rooted in strategy, doesn't really change. So that starts with discovery. What do we need to know about the audiences, creative briefs, a workshop to kind of get all your internal stakeholders on the same page, planning through things in advance, then working through the design and the budget strategy to stay in scope, designing and starting to build it in and of itself, building on the back end any development or measurement tools that we want to do to kind of measure what success looks like, and then the final design itself, and then really testing it before it launches and training people on how to use it before it goes live. So, when we're thinking about a show that you either know has been canceled or you kind of have a gut feel, be aware of this process in the time it takes to avoid any rush solutions. So we will talk about force majeure, and I can guarantee you this will be the most boring thing you will hear in the entire Stay in the Loop Infinity live stream event. However, it's important because this has been kind of a legal provision in contracts with venues or associations that has always been there, but now it's really a part of kind of whether or not we go to show. So I'm certainly no attorney, but I can kind of talk through what this means on a very high level, and then talk about what it's meant for our clients, and then refer you to something that's in our resources tab that is from an attorney that was provided through our partner, HCEA, the Healthcare Exhibitors Associations, that gives you much more straightforward legal advice. So what does force majeure mean? Force majeure is an overpowering or irresistible force. You may have heard like act of God clauses. Force majeure is very similar to that, and it's a legally successful force where it cancels. A cancellation allows the association to cancel the event without penalty to the venue itself or the association. So this is very much a all or nothing legal proposition. You wouldn't necessarily start the event. It's a 4-day event. Day one, nobody showed up, or there's COVID concerns, and then you cancel it. They're looking to do this before you go ahead and even get started. So one more quick thing on force majeure, and specifically what it means to event and trade show managers and marketing directors. Contract law attorneys, they're legally advising associations to wait as long as possible to make a cancellation decision. In other words, if the show's in October, we have attorneys counseling associations to wait until August, September, and basically build the legal case that things are significantly as bad as they're going to get. And that strengthens their legal case that the force majeure provision applies. So I pulled out a quote, and this is kind of interesting to hear how lawyers think for those of us in the marketing and sales space where we're focused on relationships and long-term business relationships. There are numerous other non-legal considerations that make it difficult to wait too long to make the cancellation decision, i.e. stringing people along, people asking what to do. That can really take its toll on business relationships and marketing budgets. So just know that, if your main show is in the fall and you haven't heard anything and you're wondering, why aren't they making a decision? Why aren't they giving us guidance? Why haven't they made the decision yet one way or the other? This is very much protecting them in terms of if they do have to completely pull back, force majeure kind of applies here. I did mention that, again, I am in no way a lawyer. We do have in the resources and materials tab a resource that gets into the details of force majeure and how it applies to associations and trade show managers. So if you go into the resources and materials tab, there's a thumbnail, HCEA force majeure webinar. Just took some notes and screenshots from an attorney that kind of guest starred on an HCEA webinar. As a proud partner and member of HCEA, we thought it'd be a great resource, especially for those of you that are in healthcare. So as we think about the infinity loop again and kind of planning for a show that might not happen, I think it's critical to think about there are certain solutions that we're suggesting this morning today that lend itself to a canceled show more than others. So again, an infinity mapping isn't really specific to any one phase, whereas a live stream event, a virtual environment, a virtual journey, again, those are things that aren't necessarily entirely dependent on a pandemic and can happen. Now, it's different. People are at home, they're logging on, they're online more, versus when we get into live events returning, or in many states not returning, then you're thinking about different types of solutions that might complement or hybrid your way back into a live event. One of the things that, for those of you that joined us in Andy and I's session, and we took kind of a deeper look at virtual experience product offerings, is being mindful of your individual venues, states, guidelines. So we used Illinois' 5-phase Restore Illinois as kind of a framework to think about how you could do certain things in certain circumstances of the pandemic. But I think the simplest way to think about it is, everyone has their top 1, 2, maybe their top 5 shows. That might be in Nevada, Florida, Texas, New Jersey, Arizona. Every state I mentioned, and everyone knows this from maybe following along the news or the CDC data, they're going through different stages of it, which impacts, back to force majeure, whether or not the show is going to happen. So just be thinking about how different products kind of impact the different ways to do it. And one way I wanted to kind of challenge everyone to think through of it this way is zooming out and planning far in advance. A couple of questions came up on earlier sessions about how much time do I need to plan these things out? The development time, the rule of thumb is 8 weeks, but I would really challenge everyone maybe 4 months out. So this is maybe a late fall show at this point. Know the host venue's state restore return to work guidelines and phases. As I said, no two states' path to open are the same. So consider the entirety of your trade show and event calendar and how it might be different from state to state. If you join the NDNI session, again, we kind of played that out specific to Illinois and McCormick, a lot of healthcare and tech shows there. But it applies to really any state that has published guidelines, which at this point is nearly all of them. Be aware of local trends in COVID-19 data. You can go straight to the source, whether it's the CDC, pulling raw information and getting a sense of, okay, I'm planning a show in Texas in October. Things are maybe tracking the wrong direction there right now. What's that going to mean for them making a decision at some point? You know, one example is Mid-States. They have a show called The Rendezvous. Mid-States is a agricultural and construction distribution show. And it was planned for September in Minnesota. They actually moved it to Texas. And at first everyone was excited. Hey, a show to go to, but you know, we've all seen maybe the last couple of weeks with Governor Abbott and kind of his mask mandates and the data not trending in the right direction, that may or may not happen. So just keep an eye on specific shows and kind of what they're doing and what the data tells us in terms of COVID-19. Again, every state kind of has something similar to what we're looking at here. And even the reason we shared Illinois is they actually get specific to mentioning our line of work, conventions, festivals, large events. You know, in Illinois, we're not going to get there until phase 5. Illinois defines phase 5 as a proven vaccine and an efficacious treatment protocol. So right now we're pretty much in the early stages of those things. That won't happen for a while. Phase 4 is kind of what we're thinking for Chicago-based clients or shows that were set to happen at McCormick that might be doing something differently. Other things to be thinking about 4 months out. Take the pulse of your company's appetite for any trade show or event activity, even if it's at a scaled down version. You know, your company might have, even if they're willing to take the risk of some of these things, they might have business challenges, maybe revenue's down, maybe business is doing just fine, but they're banning corporate travel, maybe marketing budgets are cut, so all things to be aware of. And then just whether you're a marketing director, VP of marketing, managing expectations internally with reduced audiences or maybe reduced goals, if you're looking to think about kind of a hybrid approach of face-to-face and virtual or just virtual. And really 4 months out, so again, you're looking at like a September, October, November show. Try to think about alternative ways to do a virtual experience. If the face-to-face show is still up in the air, about 4 months out, it's like, well, how could I do this virtually? And one of the benefits of virtual is the increased reach. We ran through this example here and there in some sessions. Adam and I covered it in the keynote, but this is a really good example of a client thinking strategically where, you know, the impetus to develop this was driven by a show cancellation. But what we were excited about is we developed it in replacement of a planned product launch at a show, but it also has legs beyond the show for virtually selling for their sales force. You can see in this example here, we have a couple of checkpoints programmed into the tour. We're actually capturing lead gathering information. So this is an example of, you know, really what you can do if you think beyond just one isolated show and think about a little bit more programmatically and getting some bang for your buck. So kind of moving into how to approach this from a timeline perspective, you know, if at all possible, begin to preliminary plan in parallel paths, a virtual experience and a face-to-face option, and perhaps even consider a hybrid strategy of those, especially with partial capacity mandates likely to be a factor with return to live events. In other words, the face-to-face may happen in Q4, Q1, and that would certainly be good news, but perhaps it might come at, you know, they're going to cap things at 25% of the capacity that it was last year, or 50%. One thing to consider too, especially if you're investing budget in two things, you know, obviously with a in real life event or trade show, deposits and returns apply when we're working with a general contractor for on-site show services, or working with the venue to buy show floor space. At a certain point, be mindful of the rebate or refund deadlines that would return kind of some budget control especially if you're going to develop them in parallel paths or really focus in on virtual. So again, as we kind of continue to move into the infinity loop and thinking about different products, at some point you're going to be thinking about the return to live events. And this is kind of where we get into, okay, the show is canceled. I need to do my own thing. And your options here, hub and spoke events. Adam covered this. Andy and I also addressed this in one of our earlier sessions. You know, you're doing something in person that might be at a capacity of 5 to 10 people, because that's what your state allows. But you're broadcasting it in a hub and spoke model out to maybe thousands of people at 10 different locations. Setting that up is certainly something that you should be considerate of if you have a canceled event. Briefing center tours, you know, we talked about branded permanent marketing environments, but it can also be really anything in your facility that you typically showcase for sales, putting that in a virtual experience, knowing that maybe people can't come in person. Pop-up environments, again, this could mean many things. What we're showing here is just a trailer that kind of folds out into a mobile marketing experience. This could mean tours. Andy and I covered in our Infinity Loop playbook, our mobile marketing experience, where we can bring the experience to your audiences, because at the moment they may not be able to jump on a plane and come to us. And then at some point, the eventual safe return to exhibits. Perhaps for 2021, hopefully Q4 2020, perhaps even to 2022, we may be having to deal with restrictions or parameters on our designs that we're not necessarily used to, whether that's social distancing in a product theater, for example, or brand ambassadors that are there to discuss the product, but maybe are mandated to wear a face mask. How does that look when they're mic'd up with AV concerns? Everything from even like the width of an aisle at a trade show. These are all things to be thinking about well in advance before the show itself comes out. So when you're at about 8 weeks out, you're going to want to make a decision on a virtual experience and then begin developing that project. And again, 8 weeks is when we make the decision. So 12 weeks, 16 weeks, that's when you should be considering it, honing in on scope and budget. 8 weeks is really when production starts. So scopes can vary. We talked about timelines. 8 weeks is the rule of thumb. Could be 6 weeks. We did Massimo in 4 to 5 weeks, but it was a hustle. But if you're thinking of something much on a broader scale with a lot of attendees, you're looking at 12 weeks. So think beyond isolated shows or events and consider virtual programmatically through not just this year, but maybe even into next year as kind of a hybrid strategy. I did want to touch on this topic of capital expense amortization and modular builds. This really gets into clients that are thinking long-term, have a good relationship with the procurement department to think through things, not just this quarter, but moving forward. So, you know, bringing us back to reality for a bit, in a pre-COVID-19 world, for a variety of reasons, many clients, they delay new builds. They've been going to show for 5, 10 plus years with dated properties. And, you know, maybe they're getting by with graphic updates or campaign updates, but the properties are starting to show some wear and tear. Modular new builds now serve a renewed sense of purpose and value, because I mentioned this in an earlier session, you know, portables and mobile marketing may be the first things to come back in terms of the face-to-face marketing playbook. And if you don't have those and the design language doesn't look like everything else you're doing at larger shows, you're kind of disconnecting the visual identity of your brand. So if you've been getting by with just campaign updates, graphic refreshes, there was maybe never enough time to plan a new build. The budget resources weren't there to rethink, okay, my new exhibit modular build or my new event asset properties. Well, we'll talk about budget in a second, but we certainly now have plenty of time. So, you know, some industries, tech, healthcare, what's deemed essential manufacturing, maybe industrial construction, are actually thriving. So things like revenue, things like budget pressures or business climate risk may not be as much of an issue for some of you in certain industries. Then you could think about, okay, what can we do with the budget that we're not spending on show floor space because there are no shows right now? You know, with no budget past Q1 of this year, spent on show floor space. Essentially the last really significant trade show was Con and Mine Expo at the end of February. Consider how 2020 could be the year to finally address your new build properties. And we do have one client in the pharmaceutical space that kind of went through this exercise and made the decision to build now because no one has a crystal ball. We won't know when the significant pharma healthcare shows will come back, but they will come back, and it's critical to their program when they come back that we'll have fresh properties to go to show with. So we have about 4 minutes. Again, just kind of closing on thinking through, depending on your virtual experience, what pertains to decisions you have to make for your show night canceling, and just ending on some takeaways before we get into Q&A. So first and foremost, plan for the worst, hope for the best, and dual path your virtual experience on the show that might be coming back. Understand just the basics of contract force majeure and how it delays a show decision. Again, we do have a reference material on the resources tab to dig into the weeds of that. You want to allot at least 8 weeks to develop your virtual experience. And if your company's business climate and budget resources support it, consider a modular new build while we're not going to show. Again, any one-on-one questions that might not be covered in this session, feel free to reach out to me one-on-one on my email address, rstoner@dersi.com. Quick info on the next session. You have quantifying virtual success with Charlie and I. So for those of you asking, how do you go about measuring and benchmarking these things? We'll address that topic there. And then Joe, our digital services manager, will touch on budget. What are the factors that drive virtual event costs? So quick housekeeping before we get to Q&A. Again, you'll leave this session by closing the browser. Once you leave, you'll be taken back to the event schedule page. Pick out the event you're looking to join. In that personal agenda, go ahead and join that event. So many thanks for your time today. And Charlie, I will turn it over to you for any questions we got with the couple minutes we have left.
No problem, Rick. I've also recorded all the questions, so we'll send answers if we don't answer yours in the time we have. John asks first, do you think associations will set a required registered attendee baseline in determining whether a show is to be canceled?
The short answer is yes. I think these associations, these annual conventions are one of their biggest sources of revenue. And like any other business entity, they're looking to see the tipping point or the cutoff of at least breaking even on, okay, X number of attendees at X number of dollars allows me to at least break even this year. So the short answer is yes. The other thing I would say, and maybe this changes the spirit of the question because this isn't the association's decision, but they may be forced to or pressured by their state's return to work guidelines on how many people they can bring into the show. So each state's going to tackle that differently, and that might drive how an association handles attendance requirements to keep the show going.
Good. The next one is from Deb. Did Massimo launch their virtual event on their own in combination with a virtual trade show? If it was on their own, how did they market their presence?
Yeah, great question. The answer is both. So they had a key show that they were looking to launch a product cancel. Within that show, there is an exhibit, an expo hall, actually a feature of these platforms that we're going to showcase in the platform tour. They have kind of the standard information there. Usually one of the things you can do is link out. Maybe it's your website, maybe it's a virtual environment like an exhibit. You can actually, Massimo linked out to this platform. So it was at the show that went virtual, but it's in and of itself, as of a couple weeks ago, live through an internet browser and an invitation link.
Okay, we're right at the noon timeline. Christine and Mary, and I saw Carol had her hand raised. We have you guys marked down. We will answer those questions and send you that information. Thank you everyone for attending. Enjoy your 5-minute break and we'll see you in a few minutes.
Thanks everybody. Take care.